There are three key terms on which the ideas presented in this unit are based: terrorism, critical infrastructure, and cyber warfare. It is important to define these terms, as their definitions affect the scope of this discussion. Additionally, they provide a framework around which the other concepts can be successfully presented. It's not my intent to adhere to a single source for definition, but to examine multiple sources. The critical elements of the definition will thus be extracted. In addition, it's important to explicitly identify the relationship between cyber warfare and information warfare, or infowar. As a consequence, the concept of infowar is also explored in this section.
What is the war on terror?
First, terror is a strategy. And it's difficult at best, academically speaking, to have a war against a strategy. Second, to suggest a war suggests that there's a matrice for success. So if the war on terror means that we're going to mitigate terrorism from ever happening again, we will never win that war. Much like, unfortunately, the war on drugs. The war on drugs has been around for as long as I'm alive, and narcotics trafficking is alive and well and prospering. So I would like to say that we have an effort here to contain terrorism, to reduce the risk of terrorism. And I think that's what you'll find Homeland Security, national security agencies are engaged in, which is reducing that risk, making the environment hostile for them to operate in order to be successful.
The concept of terrorism is one that has multiple definitions depending on the perceptions and viewpoints of those defining the terms. In general, most definitions encompass at least the perpetrator, the victim, the act, and some form of motivation. What differs between definitions is a sense in which terrorism is differentiated from other violent or potentially violent acts, the time scope in which terrorism is said to occur, the degree of legitimacy accorded the act, and the reach of both the perpetrator and the victim. Within the United States, two primary entities provide definitions of terrorism: the FBI and the Department of Justice. Outside of the United States, definitions from the United Kingdom and the European Union, as well as from Asia and Pacific nations, are of interest. This is because they exhibit differences in both the time scope and reach of the definitions. The FBI defines terrorism as the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof, in furtherance of political or social objectives. The FBI further classifies terrorism as either domestic or international, depending on the origin, base, and objectives of the terrorist organization.
How high should the war on terror be on our list of national priorities?
It should be high on our list of priorities because of, speaking globally, the threat that exists. Due to connectivity that we have with countries such as Israel, France, countries that are seen by groups by al-Qaeda as being infidels or anti-Islamic, by the true nature of our alliance with them means that we are subject to being attacked as well. I do think, however, it deserves to perhaps have some parity with global warming, with education, with the economy. But national security is always going to supersede everything else. I don't think you can have all of those other entities flourish in a state where the security is not felt to be confident, comfortable, and intact. So it's always going to be a priority. What's interesting, though, is that next year the Department of Homeland Security has already announced they're going to be reducing their grant funding by about 50%. So that would suggest to someone like me that they have a reasonable expectation that the risk has been reduced and they can reduce accordingly. I would hope that then that funding might go to some of those other efforts nationally that are priorities for us.
The FBI divides terrorist-related activity into three categories: terrorist incidents, in which violent acts are perpetrated that violate U.S. or state law with the intent to coerce or intimidate the government or any part of the civilian population; suspected terrorist incidents, in which it's possible that a terrorist incident may have occurred, but for which there is little or no evidence, or the identity of the perpetrators or their motives is not known; terrorism prevention, where evidence is collected with regard to a future potential terrorist incident, and, as a result of investigation and interdiction, the incident is prevented; OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, draws heavily on the FBI definition, but includes the term premeditated to underline the planned nature of terrorist activity. A terrorist act or incident is a premeditated, unlawful act dangerous to human life that is intended to further political or social objectives. The Department of Justice, concerned primarily with domestic rather than international issues, defines domestic and international terrorism separately. Domestic terrorism is defined as a violent act or an act dangerous to human life occurring primarily within the United States, that is a violation of the criminal laws of the United States, or that would be a criminal violation if committed within the jurisdiction of the United States and appears to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion,